Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Jaci Hull. So Jaci is a senior Hakomi trainer. We're going to say a little bit about what that is, I'm sure, shortly, and has a private practice as a therapist in Colorado in the US, where she's joining us today. She's been doing that for the last 30 years. So pretty experienced body psychotherapist. Jaci, welcome.
Hi.
How did you get interested in the body? What was the beginning of your story with that?
I was a psychology undergrad in Boston. And somewhere around my last year, I started to develop panic attacks. And I'd never had them. Nobody in my family had ever had them. So I really didn't know what they were, but I was having attacks. So my heart was racing. And I just happened to be working in this sort of new age workshop business in Boston called... what's it called? I forget the name of it now. Anyway, I was working there, and I told one of my friends that I was having these panic attacks, and he said, well, there's these people that just moved into Connecticut that are near our land, and they're doing something called body-centered therapy. And I thought, wow, that makes sense. Let's try that out. Because I had been going to clinics and night clinics. I was an undergrad student, so I was going to graduate students to their internships to get some information about what was going on with me.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing was happening. Nothing was changing. They were kind of sitting there taking notes, but not really telling me anything. So I went out to Connecticut, just near Boston, and had an appointment with one of our trainers, John Eisman, and I started to tell him about my symptoms, that my chest was really tight, that I was afraid of having a heart attack. And he said, he had an assistant there, and he said, would it be okay if I put my hand where that tension is on your chest? And I said, sure. Because in those days, therapy was still really open. And it still is now. So he put his hand on my chest, and he sort of pressed and held the tension that I was holding in my chest. And when he did that, I took the first deep breath that I had taken in maybe 3 months. And I could breathe finally because he was coming and holding the tension. I breathed for a while. I took some deep breaths, and finally grief started to emerge. Grief just showed up. And I was able to identify that my panic attacks were actually grief, because I was about to graduate college and my father had died a couple of years before, and I wanted him there. And in our family, we didn't really do grief. Nobody really expressed grief or talked about it or anything like that. So I didn't have a process for moving those feelings. And so when I started to feel anything, I would just start to tighten it up in my body and sort of override it, fake it, pretend I didn't have. I wasn't, I would sort of get more cheerful or maybe a little more manic or something. So when that happened, when he took over the tension in my chest and held it, and I could breathe, a lot of lights went off. I was just like, wow, what is this? How did this happen? And what does this mean when you hold information in your body? So I think that was probably in 1979 or something like that. And after that, I just decided to study this work, which was called Mikami Therapy at that point. It was started by Ron Kurtz. And Ron, while I was still finishing school, his group of people moved out to Boulder, where I am now. And I just started studying with them, went to graduate school, and really found that information was easily worked with through the body, psychological information.
And it's kind of a classic Hakomi technique, isn't it? The kind of taking over method.
Yes, it is. It's really effective. People hold their bodies to contain and manage feelings that they don't feel like they can express or have.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we see that as therapists, we track our clients. We're listening to their story, but we're also tracking their bodies. And when we start to see the bodies start to tighten up consistently, as if it's a pattern, then we will come and ask, is it all right if I come and hold that tension for you? And when we do that, which might mean holding shoulders in or holding the neck, the back of the neck if there's a lot of tension, holding tension in the hands, it seems that people feel safer at that point to feel. As long as the body knows that the containment is happening, it seems to allow the feelings to come forward. And when we have feelings come forward, we get more information. When we have more information, we know what to work with.
And what are some of the other methods of Hakomi then? So actually, first of all, maybe we should start with the name, because I found I've experienced a little bit of Hakomi, been in a few workshops, and I found the name itself tends to throw people. So there was this guy, Ron Kurtz, who's a therapist in the US, and he came up with this name.
Mm. Yeah, there's actually a little mythology about, it's not mythology, but it's a little magical. When they were trying to figure out the name of the therapy that Ron had been cultivating with this group of therapists, they were really working on how to work in mindfulness and trying all sorts of techniques and getting ideas. And when they were trying to think of the name, they were thinking, what should we call it? Ron Kurtz therapy, Kurtzian therapy. And one of his students dreamt that he was handed a piece of paper that said the word Hakomi on it. So they went and looked it up, and it's a Hopi word. It turns out it's a Hopi word, and the meaning is, how do you stand in relation to the many realms? It's sort of their archaic,
so the Hopi are Native American
way of saying, who are you? And so when they saw that was the meaning of the word, they just said, well, that's the therapy. That's what we got to call it. And this is probably 1970, maybe it was late 1970s, early 1980s, where they came up with this and decided to call it Hakomi. So we called it Hakomi for 2 decades or so. And over time, we've sort of thought, yes, it does throw people off, and people think it's Japanese massage or something. And we thought about changing the name, and we just seemed to not want to. But we did write our textbook, which is Hakomi, Mindfulness-Cantered Somatic Psychotherapy. That's the sort of proper name.
Yeah, so mindfulness-centered. Can you say what you mean by that?
Yes. When we are working with people, people are holographs. There's a lot going on in their bodies and minds, besides what they're telling you. So when we are listening to somebody, we are, again, tracking the wholeness of the person. And when there's sort of like a symptom that shows up, a physical symptom or something that seems sort of an unconscious pattern, we want to get more information about that. And one of the things we've learned is that if you have somebody mindfully study what's happening in their bodies, or a phrase that they keep using, something that's repeated, if we get the person into mindfulness and have them study, we get a lot of information. If we just wait, it's sort of like, the way I like to think of it is when you walk into a dark room and you sit there for a while, and then you can start to see the outlines of the furniture in the room and the lampshades and stuff. It's sort of, you send somebody in to access bigger parts of their brain, which will show them other parts of whatever their process they're in. So it'll show memories. It'll show more body impulses and movements. It might hear phrases might come up in that state of mindfulness. So working in mindfulness is basic to almost every process in Hakomi. You get a lot more information. Yeah.
This sounds sort of obvious in the even now, but even 10 years ago, this wouldn't have been obvious to many therapists, right? Like, I've had
Yeah.
therapists who have never meditated, and I've gone,
Yeah.
why? You're interested in the mind. Like, and now it might, for many of our listeners, it might seem common sense, rather than just go sort of blah, 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 blah. Maybe it's useful to go, oh, okay, I notice your jaw tenses when you say that. Well, why don't we slow
Yeah.
things down and would you be willing to do this experiment? They sometimes say in Hakomi, don't they? And
Yeah.
feel your jaw and feel into that and what's going on with that. Like, this might
Uh-huh.
sound sort of commonsensical, but I only think because mindfulness has come such a long way, this was really quite radical at the time.
Yeah. It was radical. And I have to say, another part of working in mindfulness, particularly that example you just gave, let's just study your jaw, let's see what wants to happen there, what's your jaw trying to do. It's very intimate working that way. You are really closely tracking somebody, and you're sort of trying to get inside their experience a little so you can really be with them as they're discovering something that has been unconscious to them because it's been hard to face. So when you're working in mindfulness with somebody, you are really intimate, and we have to teach our students and graduates to tolerate that amount of intimacy. So it might be, I'm thinking that a lot of schools, they're not teaching real intimacy. Actually, there's sort of, there's a phobia about a certain amount of intimacy
Mm.
in working with somebody. But when you're tracking and working in a mindfulness, it's very intimate because you can see everything. The person's really can't really hide a lot if they're fidgeting or there's a little micro movements in their face. You catch them, and you're able to bring them to consciousness, and that's vulnerable, very vulnerable for everybody. So that might be a factor as well, is just the amount of intimacy it takes to
Yeah, I know.
work with.
I really am aware like this in my own therapy. My therapist, or I have a coach that also works in a similar way, will say, yeah, and what's going on for you when you say that? And he'll kind of bring me back to my body, away from like, well, I think, and this is my opinion. And I
Yeah,
noticed like part of me is
right, yeah.
reluctant to do that because the shit just got real. It's like, oh, but can't I tell you another opinion? Like somehow it's harder work.
Exactly.
And I know something's being
Yeah,
exposed which maybe isn't so obvious, and I have to kind of stay in my well constructed kind of story kind of set of defenses. It's like,
exactly.
part of me is like, you son of a bitch, every time they make that move. But then it's also, I notice that's where the juiciness opens up of the therapy. It's like, okay, oh, that's really
Yeah,
interesting, I've never seen that before. Or, oh wow, I've never really realized that emotion was driving this whole script.
exactly. Yeah. The emotion and then the attempt to manage it
Right.
are working constantly in people's bodies. And they want to manage that emotion because they do not believe it's okay to show it or have it.
I've been thinking about this in the relation to a lot of the things that I see happen in the modern world and online. There seems to be a lot of underlying emotions that are being played out as aggression towards others, as consumerism. They're played out in these patterns of, I've got to buy more, or I'm going to shout at someone on the internet and tell them how wrong they are. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling like if people were to just take a step back, go, well, hang on, why do I want to go shopping today? Oh, I'm lonely. Okay, what's that about? Or like, why am I angry? I'm scared. I'm really scared right now of how the world's going, and that's where this anger's come from. Maybe it's not really the fault of the person in front of me. Like it's
Exactly.
like not recognizing that basic emotion is pretty key to a lot of what's going on right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we sort of look at in working in Hakomi and most therapies anyway, is we're looking at what somebody wants or what they really want, and then how they either get it or don't get it. So we're looking for how somebody distracts themselves from getting from A to B, meaning if I'm lonely, how do I get connected? And so we'll watch if somebody comes in and says they're lonely, we'll get curious about what happens when they go to get connected or want to get connected, because we imagine that the reasons they stay lonely or stay angry is because there's a problem they're trying to solve, but they have rules about how that problem can be solved. And so they're quite limited. So we get curious about how they stop themselves from getting what they need. So in Hakomi, we talk a lot about nourishment and people being able to get
Mm.
nourishment, get
Mm.
warmth, connection, feel they have agency, all those things, to feel like a self, to feel like a person. And we get curious about how they stop themselves from doing that. And it's not to blame them, of course, it's all pretty much unconscious. But we can watch how they unconsciously interrupt their ability to get what they want. So we have a map we call the sensitivity cycle. And it's derived from Fritz Perls. He had an action cycle, and Ron Kurtz kind of modified it. And the first step of the sensitivity cycle is insight, getting clarity, helping somebody get clear about what's going on. And if they can get clear about what they're feeling or what they're needing or what history is in the way. For instance, I didn't have clarity that I was in grief. All I knew is that my chest was tightening up.
Yeah.
Now I had clarity. I got clarity. Oh, I'm grieving. So from clarity, we go to the next step, which is effective action. So once you understand what you're needing, then you go towards how are we going to do this? And different people have trouble with effective action, taking action. It can be threat. You could make a mistake. You could do it wrong. You could hurt somebody's feelings. There's all these sort of family systems things that get in the way of taking effective action. And then once if the person gets effective action, then we go towards a sense of satisfaction, enjoying, integrating, letting something really feed you. And there's often some rules and regulations in family systems about that. But if the person is able to go into satisfaction, then we can go towards what we call rest and relaxation, or rest, relaxation, and reception, where they can quiet down their bodies and just receive information or nourishment or care or silence. And so we're watching how somebody, if they present a certain problem, how they go through that map. Do they have clarity? And if they have clarity, do they take effective action? Because some people take action, but it's not effective, right? Like if I'm really lonely, but really if I'm acting angry, but really I'm really sad, I'm not going to be effective if I just keep acting angry, right? Instead of really
Yeah.
concentrating on the sadness I feel.
I noticed one that I'd be lonely, so I'd go on the internet and I'd go on social media, but it wouldn't actually make me less lonely. So I'd take action.
Right.
Like it wasn't really this word nourishing I want to come back to, because this is something I heard from Hakomi before and really like. It's like, oh, this isn't really nourishing me. And I was just talking to a student today and I said, well, how does it nourish you when you're on the social media? What needs does that really meet? And she was kind of feeling into it and going, not really any, actually. Like there was some sort, almost like a trap she was in, trying to meet a need. And I could relate because I'd been there myself before, trying to meet a need online that wasn't really getting met.
Right. Exactly. And one of the things you said was really important. You said when she felt into it, she said, not really. Like when she felt into it. So we're saying that nourishment is actually a physiological experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just psychological. Your body feels it. Satisfaction is a physiological experience that is elusive for many people.
Yeah.
And so they don't go towards it. They don't have a compass point in their bodies for satisfaction, so they don't create it.
Yeah.
And in Hakomi, we make sure that if somebody says that feels good, we say, tell me about feeling good. Where we look for that deep breath and we look for that sort of ease of movement that will show us that they're more satisfied and really taking in nourishment and resting.
I mean, this idea of satisfaction, for me, it's like, it feels like this is a very missing physiological, emotional state in a kind of consumer culture that always wants more. Yeah. Like this actually, you know what? I'm good. I won't have a dessert. I won't sleep with the other person. I won't buy another house, car, whatever.
Exactly.
Online psychotherapy training, whatever it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm actually joking aside. I definitely see that dissatisfaction in the, people even listening to the podcast might notice that come in. Like, how many times have I downloaded 20 podcasts and some sense of I've got to have more, and it's like, well, when is my, I don't know, I hope we're meeting real needs for people like learning, for example. But it's like, when is that really
Exactly.
satiated? Do I need to listen to 20 episodes and like binge? People use this term binge watch now, like it was
Yeah.
normal. And I go, wow, binging's not good, right? Like, as a sort of ex-addict, I kind of really hear that term. People go, I binged watch Netflix for 4 hours. And I'm like, well,
Right.
you satisfied after one or not at all at the end? Like, surely, I don't judge anyone who, I watched Game of Thrones with my wife last night, but it's like, is there a sense of like satisfaction in watching that episode together rather than like, gotta watch another one? I was like, when's the next one out? I kind of noticed that as the end of the episode when the music came up. And I'm using quite great examples, but this does seem very in the zeitgeist right now.
Yeah, and what we're talking about in somatic psychotherapy across the board is how does your body reflect your level of satisfaction? What does your body tell you help you feel more satisfied? And honestly, I think you'll see this also across the board, that connection, feeling connected and held and belonging is really what helps us feel satisfied. We might watch a Game of Thrones and be pretty entertained, but how does that compare to having somebody come and put their hand on your back and or even on your heart, or to be sitting in puppy piles laughing with people, or having nice conversations where your bodies are close? That's the stuff that the body really likes. And because Hakomi and somatic psychotherapy in general is very integrative, meaning everything that happens cognitively, we want to have integrated and matched in the body. So if you say you're happy, we want to see what your body experiences as happy. If you say you're satisfied, we want to see how your body experiences that satisfaction.
So there's something about noticing satisfaction, about how that actually is in the body. And it's not just mindfulness-based psychotherapy, it's relational mindfulness. So to some people, mindfulness is sort of sitting on their own, meditating, which is very traditional in many ways.
Right.
Sitting in a cave, traditionally perhaps. Sitting Buddhists do live in sanghas, communities, but it could be seen as a solitary practice, like yoga and meditation, And there's something about relational mindfulness. Like, it seems like things like Stephen Porges' work and stuff around sort of neuroscience of connection, like Hakomi had already kind of intuitively worked that stuff out.
It did, and I'll tell you that the thing that really made us have to emphasize relationship was because we were sending people into mindfulness, sending them into their psyche to observe and see what's hidden there. We had to make sure that outside the environment, the therapeutic environment, was really safe, because we didn't want the clients to worry about what's happening outside, whether the therapist had an attitude or anything. We need the client to feel really safe to go inside. So creating that safe, we really had to emphasize how to create a good relationship and relational abilities. And that included touch once in a while, or taking over, like I said, taking over the chest, or just being able to reach out and put your hand on somebody, or, to help steady their bodies while they're looking at something that might be really hard to look at. So they go hand in hand. Working in mindfulness requires you have good relationship skills and tracking and contact skills, which we emphasize. And that's often, that's a sort of learning curve for a lot of therapists that come out of grad schools, that they haven't really learned how to make sort of verbal and nonverbal contact that shows that they are really there, really connected, and the person can rely on them. So we emphasize that a lot in our trainings.
I know they're actually technical terms, Hakomi. So do you want to say what they are by, what's a contact term for? Is it sort of, as we're talking,
right?
Is it like, like acknowledging verbally that someone's having an emotion, or is it sort of making guesses, like, it seems you're really, just waking up right now, Jaci, or whatever. Like, it's kind of like acknowledging people's experience that way, or what is it?
Yeah. Well, there's sort of three. I like to say there's three levels of contact. when you're working with somebody. The first level is just obvious. So you might be working with somebody and you've listened to what they're presenting and you notice they're tearing up. So you might say a contact statement like, tears come, huh? You're just seeing the tears. So that's like a first level. But underneath that, if I've already kind of heard the content, another contact statement that might be a little deeper might be something like a lot of longing, huh? And that's a little deeper. And if that's true, basically, if there's tears and there's longing, I might go to a third level, which is something like spend a lot of time alone, or afraid to reach out, or felt like you weren't worth connecting with. So you can make an obvious contact statement, or you can kind of go a little deeper, sort of in that holographic way, so that the client feels like you're really listening to them and you really get it.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to work hard to explain themselves to you, that you're already in there with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's that sense of like, oh wow, this person gets me. Like I'm being heard here. Like, yeah,
and is willing to.
Thanks for noticing. I don't have to explain it to you.
Exactly, really. One of the things we rarely say in Hakomi is, how does that make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a sentence that you'll hear very much because we can see how they feel.
Right.
And we're going to
at least
make somebody come out of the, it's like obvious, like they're crying.
Pay attention. Baby's crying, baby not happy. Pretty basic. So
I cringe every time I see another person say that.
And also,
when it's
even
obvious.
if you're wrong, the guess is often my experience. I'm not super skilled in this, and I sometimes get it wrong. But if I say to my wife, "Oh, you look a bit kind of lonely," she says, "No, I'm just kind of quiet today." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." So like, even if I was half right, it's still like she's going, "Okay, this person's interested in me. They're observing." It's like she just has to adjust what I say, not completely reinvent it and explain from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah, and you get really precise that way. I like to say that, your contact statement might get you in the ballpark. Your client will get you in the diamond. They're the ones that'll say, no, it's more like this. Oh, like that.
Is a diamond some baseball reference?
Oh, yes.
Is that like the bit where you hit the ball in baseball? I'm kind of guessing right now. Just a lot of our listeners aren't from the US, so I'm guessing that's a US-ism.
There's a cricket correlative or something like that.
By the wickets or something. I don't know.
I know in Canada it's like get in the arena and then in the crease.
Is that like
hockey?
An ice hockey term?
Yeah, it's an ice hockey term. Yeah.
There we go. Sports analogies. It's a nightmare. So these are some of the.
I have to make it more.
I feel like we're sort of putting a menu out of Hakomi here. So there's the sort of contact statements, these like tracking sensation, and there's also these great little experiments, aren't there, where someone will sort of say a phrase to you. Like one of these happened accidentally to me the other day. I was walking along with someone and I was giving my opinion 212, and they said, you're right. And because I had enough body awareness, I felt my whole body like relaxed. I was like, yeah, I am right. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't hear that. Or like, or when we don't let it in, like I was getting a lot of grief in a period just a few weeks back from different sources and different kind of attacks, basically. And one of my students who I'd done a lot of work with in Russia with the gay community, she knows me really well. She said, you know what? I just want you to get that you've really helped us and you've really impacted me in my life. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, she was seeing that it wasn't landing. So she went, no, Mark, really? And there was like, I needed to hear I wasn't a bad person that day. You know what I mean? It was something about being mindful to my response to you're right, or you're a good person, or you're needed, or you're loved, or whatever the thing is. And really going, wow, I'm really noticing I have a response to that today.
Yeah.
Is this something territory? I'm just using you for free therapy, Jaci, while you're on the line.
I'm happy to do therapy.
It's one thing I try not to do on interviews. I go, save that for therapy session. No one's interested. So what is this like stems or statements? I think people might be interested in that.
Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of going for nourishment, so we're always curious how somebody's either taking in the available nourishment in their life or avoiding it, pushing it out for some reason. And kids do that, as you know, if they're not going to get a need met for a long time, they just stop wanting it, or they find other ways to kind of not less functional ways to get a need met or not have the need met. So they show up in therapy 20 years later, 30 years later, wondering why some parts of their lives don't work, life doesn't work. So we are listening for what nourishment they keep out. And so as an experiment, like we will get a hypothesis. I'm going to get a hypothesis like, this person doesn't seem to, they seem to do everything themselves. So I'm going to have a hypothesis that they don't believe in help. They don't think that help really is going to come for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a hypothesis. I test it with an experiment called a probe. And a probe is just a potentially nourishing statement. So I'm listening to what I think is missing nourishment, and I create a potentially nourishing statement to say to the person to see how they respond. And I do this in mindfulness. So I'll ask my client to mindfully listen as I say to them, notice what happens when you hear the words, I'm here to help. And I have to sort of study their response. Again, mindfully study what says yes to that or what says no. And if there's a no, there's going to be a story there. There's going to be a body response and a memory somewhere in there where they will remember learning that people didn't really want to help, or that help was not really reliable, or it was help, it was inconsistent, so they kind of give up on it. And then they spend their young lives and early adulthood and adulthood lives just doing everything by themselves until either they're exhausted or really lonely, or somebody's sort of saying, I don't know how to love you. I don't know how to care for you. You don't seem to take anything from me. So, we create experiments called probes. When John Eisman put his hand on my chest to take over the tension, that was an experiment called taking over.
So a probe is like mindfully bringing this awareness to how I am with the idea of, say, receiving help. And then noticing like, oh, wow, okay, this is not a way I allow myself to be nourished.
Yeah.
I don't let myself be met in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do we do about it? Because I can imagine people listening to this going, yeah, I fucking know that, Jaci. Like, I know I can't. Like, 50% of my clients find it hard to ask for help, right? And that's like such a common one. Like, personally, I don't. But, like, I know at least 50% of people I work with do. So, like, what's the next step? It's like, okay, Jaci, I know I'm fucked up. What's next?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we sort of unpack how that happened. How did somebody learn that help was not going to work, or they shouldn't ask for help? How did that happen? And so we do something we call sort of process or working with the child self, or the child state, which is apparently it's in everybody. It's on all of us. And when we use mindfulness, we can actually get connected with it. But we help that individual learn how they learn to deny help, and the memories and the feelings and all the stuff that they are holding because of having had to make that unconscious decision. And then we, even in that process of unpacking, they're getting a lot of help. And so even their bodies are starting to listen and feel nourished and cared for. And we kind of check and track to see if it's apparent that they're starting to be open to the idea of help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We might practice things. So often, they start to, we call it the transformation stage, where they're starting to go, okay, I get that wasn't my fault. I get that how that worked, how in my family we didn't talk about help, or nobody helped anybody really. And I kind of feel like you're helping me also right now. And so I get that help is happening. And so I might say something like, I might say, let's do an experiment here. I'd like you to ask me to bring you something from the room, a box of Kleenex or a glass of water. Let's just see how that goes if you ask me for that and I bring it to you. And we sort of repair what was wounded, which could be asking for help, reaching out, setting a boundary, all these sort of developmental needs that kids and parents need to achieve, but get skipped over or lost.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to reinst them by, again, using little experiments and making sure that as they're changing, as they're shifting, that their bodies are feeling that at the same time.
So it's insight and then like a conscious practice, like realizing like, oh, actually I can in some small ways ask for help from my partner or at work, and actually realizing like, okay, this is what's going on here. And
and we do some homework assignments, try to ask for something a couple times this week.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even just like getting a massage. I was getting a massage yesterday and I was like, oh, should I ask her to go a bit harder? And bear in mind, I know the massage therapist quite well. I've known it for at least a year. And that's her job.
Right.
She's literally getting paid to do that. So it's like, and I think I'm pretty good at this. So I'm going, okay, wow, that's really interesting. Like there's some block for me to ask her to do this, And I don't think that's even like one of my personal major things. So it's like that example, I think for a lot of people is really, really strong. And I always encourage people to start with the little things,
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that's sweet. So sweet.
And there's some underlying assumptions, aren't there, in Hakomi? That like there's kind of a list of them. I think that would also bring out to people a little bit about where Hakomi is coming from, if you're willing to share some of those.
Yeah. So we have like 10 basic assumptions of the Hakomi method. And it sort of outlines also how the method works. So the first assumption is that early human experiences impact perception, what somebody is perceiving about the world, what the infant is, even though it's not really cognitive. We have subcortical parts of us that are collecting data about safety, about warmth, about being fed. It's collecting data as we're having these early experiences. So early experiences impact a person's perception. And then the perception, whatever that perception, impacts their core beliefs. I am safe. I'm not safe. I am welcome here. I am not welcome here. I am allowed to be an individual. I'm not allowed to be an individual. Those kinds of things. Those core beliefs actually inform behavior and body stance. So if I'm not safe, if this is not a safe place, my body is going to do something in response to that. So if I say to you, Mark, so imagine you're not safe. What do you do with your body? This is not a safe place.
Yeah, well, there's different ways you can go with that, right? But I imagine some people close, some people tighten or make themselves small.
Right. They withdraw, they pull their energy in, they try to be invisible, they try not to cause any kerfuffles, they just sort of become smaller and invisible and hypervigilant, we could say. If somebody comes from a family like that's pretty much how they're going to leave that family. They can leave that family sort of pulled in, tight, trying to take up as little space as possible, no idea about whether I can have a boundary or not, those kinds of things. So that's an example. If I use another example of, in this family, you got to fight for yourself and you got to be tough. And you can't be a weenie. You can't be a wimp. You better be strong and no crying. So that's going to be a different body type, right? That's going to be sort of stronger and more external in some ways and puffed up. So core beliefs, whatever you're learning about how the world is in your family, in your early life, your body's going to sort of take form around that. And it's unconscious. So our bodies just take form because it's efficient and it's protective and it's unconscious.
Yeah, just jump in there if I may. I feel like this is actually something that people actually get intuitively. Like I was just sitting in a waiting room today in a doctor's surgery, and there's a couple of people there, and there's a couple there, and they look like from a pretty hardcore working class background, and they just look ready to fight. And this guy's got his phone on, and it's quite loud, and I'm thinking, do I ask him politely to turn that down? And I looked at him and I thought, I don't think he'll hear it as a polite request. Like there's a core belief in his body that you have to fight and life's dangerous and you've got to, other people are disrespectful. It was something like that. And I just looked and went, you know what? it's not worth it. This is just going to cause a confrontation, even though it's a perfectly reasonable request. And I could probably do it in a way which most people would hear as reasonable. I looked at his body and just went, there's a core belief there that is going to get in the way of us having a reasonable conversation about this.
Yeah. Yeah. That was some good tracking.
I think people get that just instinctively, right? I don't think I had to be an embodiment teacher to realize that, because actually there was 10 other people in the waiting room who had realized the same fucking thing and were sitting there being very British about
it. Exactly. Yeah, we are really fine-tuned to track other people about safety and welcome and all that stuff. And that's also fairly unconscious with us, is that we make adjustments to other people just based on what our limbic and reptilian brains are reading, which is really cool in that way, I think. Yeah. So anyway, all that stuff is kept unconscious, and is because it's unconscious, it's usually not processed and not cleared, not integrated. So it's just sort of this wound that kind of lurks behind everybody's behaviors.
What are some of the main ones you see? Is it like, the world's not safe, or you have to struggle to survive? Yeah. I mean, I noticed it come up around money with some of my students who I'm working with, because it's pretty core survival stuff around sex, obviously, food, they come up. But underneath a belief around money, sex, or food is this even more core belief, right? About survival, for example. I mean, are there some
survival,
common ones?
Well, you're talking. Some of the things you talk about is sort of like the category of addiction, and how I had to give up on people to get myself calmed down, to help myself feel a little nourished. So I go for non-human things to calm me down. But basics are, am I safe and welcome? Am I going to be fed and nourished, not just physically, but emotionally? Is my soul going to be somebody going to get who I am? Am I going to be able to individuate and take risks, but still need help sometimes? Am I going to be able to be powerful, but also be able to share power? Am I going to be able to be honest about the fullness of myself and still be respected and still be seen as valued? Am I going to be able to talk back and stand up for myself? Am I going to be able to produce a lot and get things done, and also feel like it's okay to rest, also okay to receive? Am I going to be able to bring what I have into the world and still be respected if I don't? If it's not always A's and B's, if it's not always going to be the best. So that's like a quick little run through of some developmental needs.
Yeah, and I'm definitely seeing those, like at the beginning of a course, there's some people who almost look like they don't expect to be welcome. And I can be saying, hey, everyone, welcome to the first day of Embodied Facilitator course, or, whatever the course is.
Yeah.
And then there'll be people who I can see in their embodiments and not expecting to be welcome there. And there's other people who just walk in very open and trusting and kind of like, well, of course people like me. Of course this is a good place.
Mm-hmm.
And the perfectionism one definitely cripples a lot of students that I've seen as well. This got to be perfect.
Yeah.
They often seem to be like imperatives. Yeah. Does that make sense? These like, you have to do this, or you can't let people close. Have to win. They often seem like sort of half absolutes, like have tos and can'ts. Does that make sense in terms of belief?
Yeah. It's pretty much, it's sort of black and white. And we call that character theory, by the way. Character is how somebody has to adjust to a less than ideal circumstance in their family. So they create a strategy to survive, to be less hurt, to avoid trouble, by adjusting to what the family seems to need, or what it means to belong to this family. So certain families, you got to win, you got to be the best. That kid's going to be mobilized and scanning all the time for how they're standing, their status, that kind of thing, and competing and having to give up on relationship, because what they're learning is, if I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. And so it's really hard for them to be loved if they're not perfect, or if other people aren't perfect.
So the body is both expressing and creating or maintaining these kind of
Yes.
responses to early experiences, which have become kind of solidified, and they're now, slightly inappropriately, most of the time inappropriately acting, keeping a person acting in ways that aren't genuinely responsive to the actual situation they're in because they're historical.
Yeah, exactly. And so when they come into our office and we're listening for what they want or what they're not getting, we start to unpack that. Like, well, okay, they want this, but when they go to get it, they have this body stance, they have these core beliefs that come up, they have these ways of behaving that help them avoid getting what they want. And so we unpack all those. We look at all those things that are in the world.
And again, this
Get to know them, bring them to light, bring compassion to what?
Sorry, there's a slight lag on the line, so I didn't mean to interrupt you there. We can understand these, right? But then what do we do? It's like, okay, I get some insight. One of mine is kind of like fighting unnecessarily. And then it's like a couple of times I managed to like walk away from arguments, and my therapist was like, well done, Mark, like this is new behavior there, like positively reinforcing it, I mean, like, what do we do when we kind of notice we have someone else might be the opposite, right? To always back down, to always run away, to never to stand up for themselves. Like, again, you realize, you go, wow, this is pretty deep in me. I look like a fighter. I come across as a fighter. People feel that within a few seconds of meeting me, maybe. And I know that, and I've got an insight into where that comes from, and culturally and personally. Yeah. What's the next stage there once we've got a sense of some of our sort of meta narratives?
Well, for instance, so then we start to look at how to effectively get what you want. So if we get clarity, Mark, that part of the fighter part of you is something about, let's say, not getting hurt. You don't want to be hurt.
Sure.
So you kind of come out tough. And so we learn that how you learned to work with being hurt as a kid was sort of not helpful in a way. You learned to be tough. I'm making this up. I'm not sure about but tough fighter kids. I was one of them too. I grew up in the East Coast of the States, and we're all like that. That you learn that when you feel hurt, you just have to fight back. You either have to think you're going to be a tough kid, or you're going to be one of the kids that falls apart and cries. And so if you look around, you go, I'm not going to be that kid. I'm going to be the tough kid. So we become tough. And then we kind of say, a lot of time goes by and we haven't learned how to process being hurt, how to say to somebody, hey, that hurt my feelings, man. Could you change that? Or could you say that differently? None of that's been done for 20 years, right? We've just had the strategy and we've led with it and all that stuff. So we start when we can name, wow, you got hurt. You didn't know what to do with it. You were treated badly when you felt bad. And so we're going to redo that now and notice what it's like just to hear me say, you got hurt, or I know you were hurt, or I know your feelings got hurt. And then maybe we might say at some point, notice what it's like to hear me say, I'll protect your heart. I'll protect your spirit. Or I'll protect you when you're here with me. Because that's kind of what's missing in that hurt scenario is lack of protection.
Looking for what's missing, right? That's another key thing here.
Yeah. And so we offer this. We see how the person can, hopefully we've been working long enough so that the person can kind of start to take that idea in, that they can be protected, that people will protect them, and that their hurt matters. And we start to practice it again. In the session, we'll practice it, and then we sort of come up with little assignments that might help that person make a different choice next time than just coming out swinging.
Nice. Any other assumptions you want to go through? Well, I think we quite end our list there.
Yeah, running out of time here.
Jumped in.
Yeah. So when these core beliefs that are sort of, not very functional in some ways, they lead to disorganized and limiting behaviors, we'll say. Just people things just don't work. They can't keep relationships or jobs or stay happy, whatever it is. So the next assumption is that healing happens when the therapist can gain cooperation of the unconscious of the client. So in the therapy session, when we create enough safety and we can start to talk to these unconscious experiences, then therapy will happen. When we've made it safe enough, when we've described how to use mindfulness well enough, therapy will start to happen because we can contact those hurt moments in a childhood. We work mindfully, we work with the body somatically, and limbic changes happen, connections happen that have been on hold for most of their lives. They're restored. We integrate hurt with new possibility, and we practice it. So working in mindfulness and somatically, we make those changes. And then missing experiences of nourishment offered in mindfulness help the client have a deep understanding of how they are organized. Oh, that's what I do. And this is what I want to do. The more,
And
the
I mean,
more awareness. Yeah, go ahead.
With trauma work, is this kind of the same thing? It's not particularly, it's not like a new category. I imagine it's very much the similar things you've been describing.
It's similar, yes. However, in trauma, because trauma is so physiological, and here I'm drawing from Peter Levine and Pat Ogden. And Pat Ogden was one of our early trainers, so we've got a lot of overlay with sensory motor psychotherapy. But because trauma is so physiological, we actually don't go into the family story until we have gotten the body to reinstate their sense of safety, defense, and discharging all the energy. We work to get the body to complete some of its traumatic activation. And then we might go and talk about the family systems and core belief stuff. But in trauma, the core belief is I'm in danger. And so we work with that until that's clear.
So how do you work with that? Give us a little bit more information. I know the audience really likes stuff on trauma. It's
okay.
Weirdly the most
so go ahead. What?
I was just saying, so give a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So if I'm working with somebody, say we're working and they're talking about their family, and all of a sudden I start to see their signs of activation, like they might take an inhale, and they might kind of freeze a little bit. Maybe they just start to stare a little, or maybe there's a little tremoring happening in their arms. I'm going to at that point stop talking about the family system and go right to what's happening in their body right now. And I bring mindfulness again to these somatic activation that has happened, the somatic activations that are happening. So I bring mindfulness. I'll just say, so it looks like you just started to stare a little as we're talking about this. Just notice that if you would, and see what else is happening in your body. Looks like your breath got really shallow. Can we just stay with that for a while and just stay with your breath? And I'm, sure that they're safe, or I'll say to them, looks like we're kind of tapping into some deeper material or some traumatic material. So we're just going to stay right with your body right now. And I look for things that are going to help that person breathe and move again. So if they're freezing, for example, I might have them just see if they can move a toe or a finger a little bit. Usually if they're able to move a little bit of their body gets the idea, oh, it's okay to move. I can move. And kind of they can sequence into movement, which might be curling up or bringing a pillow over their chest or something that's going to actually help with the traumatic activation. Same with shaking. If they're shaking, we just stay with the shaking and let the shaking happen until it becomes another movement. I might invite the person just to kind of push against my hands, which usually feels good to the body when it's starting to go into traumatic activation. The idea that you can push and engage your large muscles actually starts to calm the body down. The person feels safer. And then we can process more of the trauma, whatever direction it's going in. Is this helping? I'm kind of, this is a really
it's a big question, and I imagine there's lots of methods you use. I just know listeners are really curious about trauma, and one that it occurs to me is, how does one pick? Like, there's all these different modalities, right? Like, who would be someone that would be like well suited to addressing their trauma through Hakomi, for example?
Well, most anybody that's capable of mindfulness, that they can actually turn inward and let information come from inside. So that's one of our main requirements, is that somebody can be mindful. Certainly if they are, well, that's I don't know why I'm kind of blanking here, but if their lives are fairly stable, meaning they go home to a place where they are able to make an effect and change things there, as opposed to going home to something that's still going to be chaotic and crazy. We sort of want people to have more stable households or home lives that they're going to go to. But
that makes
generally,
sense somehow. Like, there's something quite sophisticated and gentle about Hakomi, which I really like. And I kind of go, well, given where I'm at in my life right now, like some financial stability, relational stability, it's like, I could imagine really going back to Hakomi and kind of going a bit deeper into some things, and really like coming at it with that spirit of exploration. Learning seems to be a kind of a big thing in Hakomi. And I think there's other people who are just a bit more desperate and a bit more emergency room. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to get something from it, in terms of, I think. Go on.
And most likely those people are in a state of trauma. It's very hard to think. It's very hard to solve problems when you have an active traumatic activation in your system. It's just really hard to function, to get things done. So we attend to that kind of trauma first before we go into deeper family.
Why don't we open this up a little bit, Jackie, as we sort of start to move towards close? We've got a little time as we start to, like, what does Hakomi have to say about the wider world right now? Because it could all seem sort of very indulgent, can't it? Sort of middle class, boulder therapy, $100 an hour, like one-on-one. Like what's the bigger? How does this body of work, which I really recommend to people, by the way, I have a lot of respect for Hakomi. How does it, what does it say about the wider world right now?
Well, the way I address that is in my lead training groups in North and South America and Canada, and a lot of what I do in there is create I not only have students that are learning, but I'm creating a community where they can use these skills and this awareness to create more and more warm and helpful communities. In Brazil, one of the main things we do is we teach Hakomi in the morning, and in the afternoons we teach healthy group functioning. And so, because it really seems that we can take care of ourselves individually on one-to-one, but we need to be able to go out and create community and people that will help each other and that feel free to love each other. I didn't think you could be in a group and actually love who was in the group until I joined and practiced, not only with Hakomi, with something called Matrix Works, where you learn to actually actively love a group, be a functional member of a group, be a creative member of the group, to not get lost in chaos and differences, but to make differences as creative solutions.
Maybe this has been lost right now. Like, maybe I'm becoming old and conservative, but this idea of being a member of society almost seems to have been lost.
Yeah.
Like,
yes,
looking at this guy on his phone was kind of super loud, and everyone was kind of annoyed, but then everyone was not saying anything, which is very British. It was like, this is it was a very small thing, and it wasn't a big deal, but it struck me as a sort of microcosm for people forgetting how to be part of a group, being part of a society. And I was just in super multicultural North London, and much as I loved the Ethiopian food I was eating, and there's a lot of interesting, cool diversity, there's also a sense of sort of where's the center of this society now?
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a center, and whether that's, just kind of, we're all got a bit narcissistic and in our own process, or the world's changing so fast and we're all moving around so much. There's some sense of like losing what it is to be part of society.
Exactly. To be part of community, to actually trust, to create community where we agree that we're going to be good to each other and we're going to create good solutions and we're not going to go to war. And, to start practicing that in small groups and make them bigger. And, I just think the attitude of creating community that can learn to love each other and be helpful to each other is really what has to happen next.
Mm. And bringing back in that piece around listening as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, wow, this person's politics are really different from mine, but actually it feels like there's anger there, and underneath that, maybe there's hurt,
Absolutely. And, ultimately getting to the same place, which is we just want to be loved and we want to have a nice time with each other.
Mm-hmm. There's a commonality there, isn't there, of basic need.
Yeah. Ultimately, we're going to find that somewhere, and that's really lost now. There's so much division. It's hard to imagine how we'll get back there. But I know that what I can do is keep creating, what do we say? In Hakomi, we say changing the world 25 people at a time.
Well, that's the size of a group, is it, generally?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, with the internet, this is going to go out to a few thousand people, Jaci. So, 25, it's an odd number. Get down with the kids with the internet. We can make that 2,500 now. We'll have you at the next conference and scale it up to a couple of thousand at least, I think.
Yeah.
So, Jaci, it's been a real pleasure.
Right.
I think that's a nice place to kind of wrap up in a way, kind of positive message, but without... Yeah, I mean, in terms of finding you're in Boulder, right?
Yeah, I'm in Boulder.
And Boulder, is it just sort of therapists giving other therapists therapy? I imagine it's just a sort of, it's all your clients must be therapists and yoga teachers.
My clients are not all therapists, but some of them are.
I'm just joking.
It's a mecca. It's a mecca.
We get a few downloads from there. And that book you mentioned was very good. So do you want to mention that title again? So I've got a copy on my shelf here, and I think people would enjoy it.
Yeah. Hakomi, Mindfulness-Cantered Somatic Psychotherapy. It's our textbook, basically.
And
most of the faculty have.
So the lines break up a bit now. Do you have any like trainings or websites or anything like that people should go to?
You can go to hakomi.com. That's just one whole word, and see workshops are happening. We have in Europe and China and North and South America. Like I said,
there it is.
You can see.
And I spell that as Hakomi, Hakomi, HakomiInstitute.com.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to have a therapist retreat in Nelson, British Columbia in August, late July. Somebody can look that up and see where that is, but I'll have that that's open to therapists, where we kind of hang out together and do some work together, and also be on this great piece of land that these people have.
And Jaci, do you have
that'll be happening everywhere. Yeah. What?
So this line's gone really bad. There's a delay, but we've made it to the end. We did well. It was good for most of it. And parting message about the body to finish up, Jaci.
Well, everything you need to heal is in your body. In body and relationship.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Have a good rest of your evening.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodifacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodifacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodifacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.